Okay, I'm excited to talk to you about sibling relationships because they're so much less researched than parent-child relationships, marital relationships, or peer relationships. Drastically less researched. So here's some key things we'll be talking about sibling relationships. But first, let's just keep in mind that about 80% of US kids have siblings, and if a child has a sibling, they're going to spend more time interacting with them than anyone in their lives, even their parents. And so siblings, as we'll talk about, share features of both basically parent relationships and peer relationships. They also influence physical development, social and emotional development, and cognitive development. Sibling relationships can really vary in their roles and processes, and they definitely can be influenced by parents. So here's some differences between sibling relationships and peer relationships. So there's usually a greater age disparity between siblings than there is in friends. Generally, the sibling who is older has more power and privileges. And so younger siblings see kind of older ones as both kind of controllers and sometimes facilitators. In middle childhood, friendships rarely cross gender boundaries, so that's an unusual experience for siblings and also kind of other relatives. The rate of conflict is higher with siblings than with peers. And also when siblings are fighting, it's not something that they can just kind of take a break from at the end of a school day. It can be ongoing. Competition for parents' attention and approval is common. It can really intensify after about the age of 8, sibling conflict, based on that kind of social comparison and things not being fair. And then lastly, siblings can be a source of attachment, can be attachment figures for one another. So we know that siblings can influence, for example, motor development. So one research question could be, does having an older sibling help or hinder motor development? Imitation theories would suggest that because a younger child wants to imitate the older, it could kind of incentivize their movement, early walking. But parental resource theories would suggest that parents of later born kids are less free to basically support motor development. And the research on it has been mixed. In some families, older siblings walk significantly earlier than younger, and in others, the opposite happens. And it doesn't seem to be influenced by gender or weight. Okay, so siblings can also influence cognitive development, and this study gives some nice examples of that. It was a study of about 150 preschoolers and then tracking them from age 3 to about 5.5. And having a child sibling at home was correlated with both accelerated basically development of theory of mind, right? Understanding that our minds are separate from other people's minds, and also accelerated executive functions, even for the eldest child. So birth order didn't show to be significant. It wasn't like only younger, like we might hypothesize, had accelerated and not older. However, number of siblings was advantageous. So the more siblings that you had, the more your theory of mind was accelerated and the more your executive functions were accelerated. And so the possible mechanisms are that, with the accelerated theory of mind, is you are constantly having access to each other's, what's in each other's minds, and recognizing what's similar and what's different during play and conflict. And you also might kind of witness how your sibling is disciplined and kind of imagine that situation and then avoid that situation yourself. And through your play, in terms of executive functions, you might have to kind of use your EF skills, right, to compete and to win games with your siblings. And you're going to have to use your EF skills to control impulses, both during conflict and during play. Okay, so let's talk about how siblings influence each other's social and emotional development, and more specifically, empathy and pro-social behaviors. So empathy is kind of considered to be the motivation behind pro-social behaviors. Positive sibling relationships are associated with greater empathy and pro-social behaviors. And so this was a study of about close to 500 kids, where the younger sibling was maybe a year and a half and the older sibling was about 4 years old. And we might hypothesize that older siblings actually help socialize the empathic and pro-social tendencies of younger kids, but it's actually bi-directional. So birth order, is something that lots of us are kind of informally fascinated about. I know I have been, like, what are the differences, between firstborn and laterborn? And I wish I could tell you that there's super clear differences that are consistent, across lots of studies. And so but I can tell you it's pretty much just been mixed support. Some studies have found small differences. Some studies have found no differences. But the studies that have found differences show some trends, that firstborn and only children tend to be more achievement-oriented, more conscientious and anxious, less aggressive, and later-born children tend to take more risks, are more sociable, extroverted, have learned to be more agreeable because they've quickly, they never in their life, right, are getting their way. And are kind of resulting in more popularity with peers. In terms of how parents parent differently with firstborn and laterborns, this is an under-researched area. There's kind of two models. One is the learning from experience model, where parenting improves. And we can see this, that when we compare parents who are parenting two children, and we compare at when the child was at the same age, so when the first child was at 15 and the second child was at 15, parents of later born adolescents are more knowledgeable. They engage in less conflict. They show more warmth. So there is kind of evidence to support that. But there's also the resource dilution model, which would say that as parents have more kids, they have less energy to invest in laterborns. There's less parental investment, and that could lead to worse child outcomes. So in terms of the roles that siblings play in one another's lives, this isn't a formal typology, but these were a number of different ideas mentioned by McHale et al. And I just thought it's interesting to throw those out there when we're thinking about all the different roles that siblings can play for each other, and combinations of these. So a sibling might be someone that you just, spend time with and entertain yourselves together. Could be someone that you turn to when you're in distress. Could be someone who's a role model for you, either positively or negatively. So they could, help you be more successful, or they could help you get into more trouble. They can be what's called a foil, which is something that you react to. And we'll talk more about that. You react to become something else. They could be a niche holder in a family. So they have, secured the helper role, and that feels full and you can't take that on. They could be somebody you fight with, right? You're combatant, or they could be somebody you compete with to try to be better, at and maybe win more favor from parental figures. In terms of sibling processes, we could also imagine how these roles kind of play out, that sometimes siblings can facilitate similarity between each other. So if your sibling is more of a companion, a confidant, a role model, then you might kind of follow in their footsteps a little bit, and that could be more positive or more negative. There's been quite a bit more research on the negative. And so, like in terms of risky sexual behaviors or substance use, and negative modeling is more common when siblings are of the same sex, when they are close, and when they have kind of a shared peer group. But we could imagine that, like we talked about, siblings could be more similar on prosocial behavior and empathy too, so there could be some positive modeling as well. And then there's the idea of differentiation, where you are trying to be different from your sibling. Your sibling is something you're reacting to. You're not going to be them, or they've taken this niche and you're trying to find a different one for yourself. And so this is where you kind of de-identify with them. I'm different from them. I select a different niche. I kind of highlight and strengthen different personality traits. And hypothetically, this is supposed to maybe protect us from rivalry and jealousy, right, if we're different. But there's mixed findings on that, on how it influences kind of sense of closeness and conflict. And then when we think about how sibling relationships are influenced by what is happening for parents, and this could be in the co-parenting subsystem, if there's more than one parent in the family. This can also be how the parent in each child's subsystem. So basically, the spillover, hypothesis would say that the quality of the co-parenting subsystem or each parent-child subsystem is going to spill over into the quality of the sibling subsystem, and then that's going to spill over into child adjustment, right? So if things are going better with parents, then things are going better with siblings, and then kids are doing better. The compensatory hypothesis would suggest that perhaps in reaction to negativity, in the co-parenting subsystem, or interparental conflict, or between parents and kids, that siblings might form basically a close relationship to kind of buffer themselves from this negativity and conflict. And then that could lead to more positive child adjustment. And so, like, evidence to support spillover would say that, yeah, research has found that if you have high conflict in your sibling relationship, then you can have high conflict with peers. But evidence for like compensatory says that sibling warmth, ends up decreasing your risk of depression if your family is experiencing more stress. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this interesting area called parents' differential treatment, or PDT, of siblings. And so the idea is that parents might treat each child differently. And this can be perceived in different ways, and it's probably, a little bit challenging research-wise to figure out, what PDT is really about in each family. So this can be about parent variables, that how a parent manages stress and anxiety and conflict in a system is they favor a child over another, and they make one child kind of the scapegoat and one child the favorite. Systemically, parents often repeat patterns that they grew up with, and I think therapists notice anecdotally that these patterns of scapegoating someone and favoritism can repeat through some families and not others. Or a parent may just relate more to one child and struggle more with relating to another. And then it can also be about child variables, right? And so then that becomes more like about sensitivity. So if I'm going to, each child has different needs, and so what's good for one child might not be good for another child. One child might want, to be invited to go with you places on errands, and another child doesn't really want that. So I think that's an important framework to keep in mind when we're thinking about differential treatment. Is it sensitivity or is it favoritism? And sensitivity is, better basically than favoritism. What the research suggests is that children can tolerate low amounts of parental differential treatment, and their perceptions of it matter, right? How much, actually I should go back and say, and parental differential treatment in the research studies can be measured by what kids perceive, if they perceive there to be difference in treatment, or it can be measured in quote unquote actual PDT, which is still basically parent reports or child reports of parent conflict with each child or closeness with each child, and then getting a different score to see how different those are. When we think about perceived PDT or child perceived PDT, the reasons for parents' differential treatment and the fairness of it matters for the effects. So there's much less negative effects if a child perceives that there's valid reasons and thus it is fair. So if I'm a child that has a sibling with a disability and my parents are giving my sibling more attention, if I perceive that that is a good reason and that's fair, then it's going to have less negative effects for me. You know, the research in this area would say that, for example, parent differential treatment that's perceived by children is more correlated with substance use. So if it's bothering kids, then that's linked to substance use. But that's only in families that aren't very close, have low cohesion. So cohesion may kind of offset the PDT. And then actual PDT, like a difference score in closeness or conflict in how a parent treats each child, is more likely when parents are living in stressful situations. So not, having economic stress or experiencing a divorce, for example. Differences in negative reactivity or like conflict have more of a powerful effect on kids than differences in positivity. So, a parent being harsher with one child than another is more powerful than a parent being nicer to one child than another. And not only does it increase behavioral problems for the child who's disfavored, but it also can increase behavioral problems in the family overall. And if you have a chance, you could watch this quick news clip that features researcher Jennifer Jenkins, who's one of the authors on these sources, kind of talking about PDT.